Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. We come now in our ongoing examination of the Westminster Shorter Catechism to question 41, which asks this: wherein is the moral law summarily comprehended? If you remember, question 40 asked, what did God at first reveal to man for the rule of his obedience? And the answer to that was that he had revealed his moral law. That was our rule for obedience. Now we ask, where's that moral law summarily comprehended? And our fathers answered, the moral law is summarily comprehended in the Ten Commandments. I find this answer not only biblical, not only sound, but also very needful in our own day. You see, we live in a day that is profoundly, inside the church, antinomian. We're anti-law. And in fact, what we have come to do is we pit God's law against love. In fact, it was way back in the early 70s, I believe, when a very popular book came from the pen of Richard Foster called Situation Ethics, in which he taught that the right thing to do is always dependent upon the situation, and whatever the loving thing to do in the situation is, that's what you're supposed to do. And in one sense, he's absolutely right. In another sense, he's absolutely wrong. And the place where he's wrong is when we pit the law of God against the love of God. The two are one and the same. God's law is the instruction manual on how to love. Think of it this way. If you were to go out into the world and you were to say, I don't know, let's say you read 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. You read it to the unbeliever and you say, do you think this is a good way to live? Most of them would probably say, absolutely. And then you show them, I don't know, the book of Deuteronomy, Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Is this a good way to live? Well, no. Well, according to Jesus, it's the same thing. You see, we're reminded by Jesus that that the Ten Commandments are wrapped up in the Great Commandment to love. That's right, love. To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. You can look at the law of God in a manner of speaking like a set of Russian nesting dolls. Those are those dolls where you have the doll, it's sort of typically, I don't know, wooden, maybe it's porcelain, I guess some of them are plastic now, but they're shaped sort of like a bowling pin. And you can pull them in half. And when you pull them in half, you find inside the Russian nesting doll another Russian nesting doll, only smaller. And then you open that one, and there's another one smaller. And then it can go however many deep it goes. Well, the law of God is given its most wide, clear, expansive definition, declaration in the whole of the law of God. That isn't in the revelation where God says you got to do this, you got to do that. And wherever there's a law, this is a revelation of the law of God. But as it says in that text in Matthew, all of that can be subsumed under a shorter version, which is the Ten Commandments. the Ten Commandments isn't something different from the rest of the law. It's not the top 10 and then every law after that is 11 through whatever. No, the Ten Commandments are that category under which all the broader law is subsumed. And then, in turn, those 10 Commandments can be subsumed under the Great Commandment, which we know commands us to love the Lord with everything in us and to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Which means, friends, at the end of the day, loving God and loving our neighbor is the same thing as keeping the Ten Commandments, which is the same thing as keeping the whole of the law. Are you tracking with me here? The moral law is not something distinct from the Ten Commandments. It's not something distinct from the Great Commandment. These are all one thing. The only question is, how much has it been unpacked? How much has it been unfolded? But it is, at the end of the day, the same thing. So that when I follow my command to love my neighbor, that means I don't move the markers between our land. I don't take his oxen when it wanders off of his property onto my property. I love my neighbor by using fair weights and measures. I love my God by having no other gods before him, by not committing adultery, by not unjustly hating my brother. It's all one and the same thing. And any time you see anyone trying to pit them against each other, well, that's not someone you should be listening to. We are called to do all of these things because they are one thing. To love the Lord our God and our neighbor, to keep the Ten Commandments, and to keep the whole of the law. Have you been enjoying the Jesus Changes Everything podcast? If the answer is yes, then the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to keep enjoying the Jesus Changes Everything podcast. Whether or not you're willing or able to do any of the other things that I'm going to give in a list of suggestions should not change this first one. If you're enjoying it, keep enjoying it. The second thing, however, is that I would ask you to do this. If you're enjoying it, would you tell somebody? Would you tell a friend, hey, I don't know if you listen to podcasts, but I've been listening to Jesus Changes Everything, and it's been really enjoyable. You can tell them face to face. You can tell people on social media. You can share. You can link. You can, I don't know, hire one of those planes that have messages dragging behind it. Or you could tell me. I would like that. It would be an encouragement to me. You can send us an email or message one way or another and let us know you're enjoying the podcast. You can do the same thing in any of the places that you download the podcast. Leave a review. Let people know. The third thing, keeping in mind that if you are unwilling or unable to do the second thing or the third thing or whatever comes after that, I still want you to do the first thing. The third thing is, would you consider supporting our work? It is not an easy thing to put this out. It's an enjoyable thing. I certainly enjoy it and have fun doing it. But it takes time. It takes energy. It takes resources. And we could use your support. If you find this podcast worthwhile and you're in a place where you're able to give, I'm asking you to consider doing so. I'm not demanding it. Let's go back to point number one. I'm not saying, hey, if you're enjoying it and you feel guilty because you're not giving, the solution is to stop enjoying it. No. If you're enjoying it, what's the rule? Oh, yes. Keep enjoying it. If you can support us, please do so. There's all sorts of ways to do that. You can send us a check in the mail. You can go to rcsproulJR.com, and there's a button right there. It says donate, and it'll walk you through the process. We would love to have monthly donors. We have some. We could always use more. We'd encourage you to do that. We're going to continue again to produce the show, to put the show out. So if you're willing and able to do that, we would really ask you to prayerfully consider coming alongside us and financially supporting not just the work of this podcast, but all the things that we do here at Dunamis Fellowship. Which I suppose brings us to number 4. If you're enjoying the podcast and you haven't tried them yet, I haven't posted them through all the normal channels, though I do put them up every day on Twitter and on Facebook. But I'm going to ask you to check out the Ask RC 5-minute little things that we do. I'm afraid to call it a podcast because that would mean I have 2 podcasts. The truth is, I probably have 2 podcasts. It's called Ask RC. You can find it on at RC Sproul Jr. on Twitter, or on RC-Lisa Sproul on Facebook, or you can go to YouTube and look at the RC Sproul Jr. channel. Right now, I think we're up to 75 or so of these questions, 5 minutes, that we're trying to give people answers for. And as always, give a listen, enjoy, support, share. That's what we're looking for. And next on the list, if you've enjoyed the podcast, I would invite you to come join us on a Monday night. If you're nearby, come join us in our home. We provide a meal for our guests at 6 o'clock Eastern Time on Mondays, right before our study. And by the way, even if you can't be here, you can listen in live or later on Facebook Live. It's live on Facebook Live, but then we always post it at rcsproulJR.com, and we post it at rc-lisa at Facebook. So those are some of the things that we're doing, not all the things that we're doing. I guess I should add one more thing. If you've enjoyed the podcast, you might enjoy, some of the books I've written. Just recently added a books page to rcsproulJR.com. I'm asking you to please check it out. If you purchase the book through that site as an Amazon affiliate, we will, as a ministry, receive some of that support. So there's some basic, broad ideas of what you can do. Don't forget rule number 1. If you're enjoying the podcast and you don't want to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7, keep enjoying the podcast. If you can do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and want to do 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and pray about it and feel led to do so, please do so. We could use that kind of encouragement and that kind of support. We would love to grow, and we have been growing, by the way. The last several months, we've increased our downloads roughly about 10% each month, and we hope to continue with that. I'm learning a little bit more about SEO, search engine optimization, all sorts of exciting prospects for future growth through things like that, and me just on where I am on my learning curve. So that's what I'm asking for today. I'll be back next week to ask the same kind of thing, some other way. But don't forget rule 1. I hope you'll continue to enjoy Jesus Changes Everything. As we've been about the business of covering proper theology, talking about who God is, or theology proper, we have taken something of an unusual approach, but one that I trust has been faithful to historical orthodoxy. I'm not trying to posit a different God from the God that has been affirmed by the Christian faith from the beginning. But I am trying to, if not move away from, at least move beyond the simple listing of various and sundry attributes in the abstract and then applying them to the character of God. Well, today I'd like to do something a little different as well. That I don't know if this is one of those things that sort of comes to me late and everybody else already knew this, or if this is something a little bit unusual. And what I'd like to present today is this, in our understanding of who God is this, that God is Jesus. God is Jesus. Now, I know that if I say Jesus is God, I'm not going to have any raised eyebrows, any pushback, and in fact, I'm likely to elicit from you all yawns instead, because we have spent great deals of ink and effort and manpower affirming and defending the biblical truth of the deity of Christ, and I've certainly am wholeheartedly behind all of that. Jesus is God. But can you see how we might miss something if we don't add to that God is Jesus? It's almost as though when we speak about Jesus is God, that God becomes a kind of a status or a standing or an achievement, like he has attained to this level. Now, we may, of course, reject that because he's always been God. He's been God from all eternity. That's absolutely right. But still, we can look at it as simply a description of a status. When we flip it around, however, when we say God is Jesus, we're getting a little closer to something that Jesus himself said when the disciples said, show us the Father and we will be satisfied. And he replied, essentially, don't you get it? I and the Father are one. This is not a affirmation that the Father and the Son have the same goals, the same desires, the same commitments, the same qualities, the same character. There is an ontological unity there that does, on the one hand, speak to the truth that Jesus is God, but also speaks to the truth that God is Jesus. I think at heart, again, most of us are basically tritheists, that we think there are three beings and there is a unity of purpose, a unity of quality, but we don't really see a living organic unity, a oneness, for want of a better word, although hard to imagine there could be a better word, a perichoresis. When we say God is Jesus, what we're really getting at is the glorious truth that Jesus is Emmanuel. He is God with us. He is God taking on flesh and dwelling amongst us. He's not God Jr. He's not like God. He's not, again, God-like qualities. He is the one true God. That one true God absolutely exists in three persons. These three persons do not have an identity of personhood. There's a distinction in their personhood. I'm not denying that. But that distinction in their personhood does not undo the unity of their being. The God, the one true God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This is the God that Jesus is. Now, also, don't lose sight of the fact that Jesus is truly man. I'm not falling off the other side of that horse. Nor am I ultimately today trying to fully, as if that could ever happen, unpack the incarnation. I'm not trying to unpack the incarnation. I'm not trying to unpack the Trinity. What I'm trying to get us to see is that to say God is Jesus is a helpful way to round out the idea that Jesus is God. God is Jesus. Which means in turn that everything that we love about the living God is in Jesus in its fullness, and everything that we love about Jesus is in God in his fullness. I know it's confusing. I know it's difficult. My goal here has not been to check off a number of boxes in your understanding. I want you to join me just going, whoa, wow, to marvel at the glory of our God and the blessing of our gospel. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.